Are we seeing an end to the 17-year trade war between the US and European Union on aerospace? Laura Fraedrich is a global trade and policy attorney with Lowenstein Sandler. Hello, Laura. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me. So this is interesting. What just happened between the US and EU on aerospace?
I think it reflects what we expected a bit from the Biden administration, and that is to deal with some of the major issues of the global trade system through more multilateral approach. And I think what we see here is that the EU and the US realize that there are other very important issues to deal with around the world, and they could come to an agreement related to the aerospace issues to try to react together what's going on in China and the rest of the world. So I think they see bigger fish to fry, so to speak, and decided that they could figure out a way to resolve some issues and work together on the aerospace issues so they could partner to deal with some of the larger global issues that are impacting the world economies.
Well, this one felt intractable. I just wonder, it doesn't amount to just sweeping it under the carpet and to concern also with other issues. Is there a true settlement to this particular dispute which amounts to a dispute between Boeing and Airbus with the US and EU governments standing in as proxies? But is there really a solution, or are they just kind of like shoving it aside and saying, we got more important fish to fry?
My view is a little bit of the latter, a little bit more of the latter. I mean, they've left themselves some wiggle room to deal with things, to say we're going to hold off on any trade remedies for 5 years and let's see what happens and how it goes. So it may not necessarily be the end of things, but I do think it's a little bit of the latter there, deciding that there's more important things that they need to work together on and to not use up valuable resources on, as you note, what seems to have been somewhat of an intractable issue. They just can't agree.
Yeah.
They've been at odds and have gone through the WTO dispute resolution system, which now is also somewhat broken.
Yeah.
And so they know they just needed to make a resolution so that resources could be devoted elsewhere, in my view.
There's no other forum then for them to take this dispute to, is there? As you say, WTO isn't really there for them at the moment based on what's going on there. No other place to go.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Each side claiming that the other side's government is somehow subsidizing the operations of their domestic aerospace manufacturer. That again, is that just a question of judgment as to whether that's true or not? I mean, certainly there are subsidies out there, but how do we even get a sense of like what actually happened that caused this? I mean, can we come to a conclusion, or is it just too confusing to even want to address right now?
Well, I think it is somewhat confusing. I mean, I think that historically the place to address those allegations has been the WTO, and there have been certainly some decisions where the WTO determined that the EU was subsidizing Airbus and the US taking compensatory tariff moves related to that. And, I think an understanding that without that WTO dispute resolution system anymore, they just needed to come to the table and figure something out.
Yeah.
So that they could move on and stop, dealing with each other as trade adversaries and turn their attention to other countries, which are more needed to have the resources to address those issues.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when it comes to the US and China, at least in the early months of the Biden administration, we haven't seen much change, if any change, in the way we're dealing with that particular issue. So we actually are seeing change in US-Europe because they are traditional allies, right?
Right. Well, and one of the reasons I think we haven't seen any change yet related to China is President Biden's announcement that he wants to deal with it in a multilateral way. And so I think the EU resolution of the Airbus Boeing disputes is leading toward that progress to deal with China in a multilateral way. He doesn't want to just take unilateral. It's not like the last administration where, we would wake up and there would be a tweet and we had new tariffs or new policy going on. So sorry, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, what form would that multilateral participation take? Would it be the United States reconsidering its decision not to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and now the new version of the TPP, got a longer acronym, I know, Might we reconsider that as our forum for confronting China, or is that not even a logical place to take that?
I think that could be part of it. I think
Because China's not in it, so.
right. It's right. I think that could be part of it. I mean, after all, the USMCA that the Trump administration negotiated is very similar in a lot of ways to the TPP. So I could see the United States deciding to join that. But I also think there will just be discussions among our allies together to come up with ways and discussions to deal with the China trade issues. I don't think President Biden wants to immediately do away with the 301 tariffs, for example, until he sees what our partners think about what's going on and how they're going to handle that together.
What do the early signs tell you? Does it look like there's a willingness on the part of our European allies to engage with us again, to take us back into the fold and pursue true multilateral cooperation?
I think so. I think that's what this settlement signals in large measure. I think it does.
Yeah, interesting. So are there other aspects of EU United States relationships that are also particularly sensitive, that are also being addressed or not addressed for that matter as we turn our attention to China, or is this the big one?
I think this is the big one. I think that the United States is going to need to figure out what it wants to do with trade in the UK after Brexit and sort out those issues as well. But I think resolving this very large, very long-standing dispute, I think will bring a lot of goodwill toward future discussions in this arena.
What we don't hear, it used to be back in the day, there was a big deal about EU or European, maybe it wasn't EU at the time, but European farm subsidies. We heard about wine lakes and butter mountains and things like that, but they don't seem to be on the table anymore. Is that just not even an issue now?
I think it's just less of an issue. I think bigger issues, bigger fish to fry.
Yeah. What about the geopolitical aspects of our relationship with China too? It's not just about trade, it's about other larger issues. Do we have to take those into account now in a way we never did before? Or what's going on? I refer specifically to China's asserting a kind of greater control over the South China Sea, for instance. These are related to trade as well, are they not?
Absolutely. And I think what we're seeing with what you're discussing, and also with the human rights issues with the Uyghurs and the Xinjiang region, is we're seeing the US government using all of its trade measures to try to affect the geopolitical landscape over there. We've got import restrictions now on goods coming out of the Xinjiang region. We've got a lot of Chinese entities being added to the entity list so that US persons or no persons around the world can ship them any US origin goods. We've got a lot of new entities being added to the OFAC, specially designated nationals list. So it's a very sort of broad approach using a lot of government agencies to restrict trade and try to change the way China is doing a number of things.
Do you think that anything that we're doing or the Biden administration is doing is now causing private companies to lose their appetite for sourcing in China or not?
I think over time, especially when you compound what the Biden administration is doing with what the Trump administration did, certainly with the China 301 tariffs, I do think private companies are seeing a lot more geopolitical risk to doing business in that area. And I think they're thinking very hard about certainly whether to go in. And I think a lot of companies that are already there are thinking about whether they can move out and go somewhere else, Vietnam or Malaysia or Indonesia. From my discussions with so many clients who are dealing with the 301 tariffs, the problem there is that they have invested so much money and so many years in developing the supply chain in China. And it takes a long time, that it's not just a simple, we can just move this quickly. There's been a lot invested, but I think certainly anybody who's thinking about it now is being much more wary given the geopolitical risk.
Interesting that you should mention that the alternative is Southeast Asia. I didn't hear you say back to the United States or even back to North America for that matter. You don't think that's a real strong likelihood right now?
No, I don't. I really don't. I think the U.S. economy and what we do and what drives the economy here has changed so much in the last 20 years or so. The cities and towns where the manufacturing was occurring sometimes aren't vibrant anymore. The facilities are too old. The technology's too old. The employees just aren't there in a lot of cases. So I don't see it coming back to the US. No.
So for companies, for private companies, other than just standing around and wringing their hands and hoping that this is all resolved, in the meantime being buffeted by all of these trends, is there something that companies themselves can be doing in order to protect themselves against the vagaries of these situations?
Diversify.
Mm.
I think
Diversify
diversify.
sourcing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Mhm.
Have more than one good source location going on.
And that doesn't mean like 4 different suppliers in Thailand.
No,
That means
diversify across countries, diversify.
hemispheres, right?
Yeah, yes.
And maybe even, I don't know, the EU is a pretty expensive place, but Eastern Europe, I'm just wondering if there are any possibilities on, on the European continent for us as well, or
Yeah.
will Asia continue to be the future of US sourcing?
I think Asia is the front runner, but I certainly think companies are going to start to look at any place that seems reasonable and effective.
Yeah. Well, how interesting, though, that we are seeing finally an end to this, as we said, apparently intractable dispute between the US and EU on aerospace in favor of turning our attention to China, where the real threat to US interests might be. Laura Fraedrich, Lowenstein Sandler, thank you so much for enlightening me today on some of these big mega issues. I really appreciate you being with me.
Thank you. I appreciate being here as well. Thanks a lot.